vinyl. That is making this weird humming noise.
Welcome to Behind the Scenes Live from Doors Open and Resident Advisor. My name is Martha, and today we're going to be asking, what is A&R? So being an A&R scout is often seen as one of the more shiny jobs in the music industry, but today we'll learn about the intricacies of the role, how it varies, and some of the different contexts that A&R is relevant across the industry. So here to help me understand what A&R entails, we've got Tony from events platform CDR.
Hey, how you doing?
Holly, an A&R scout at the major label Warner.
Hello.
And Nicole, boss of her independent label Mike, which stands for Music Inspires Change.
Hi.
We're also super keen to hear your questions, so submit them in the live stream and I'll put them to our panel later on in the show. First though, Nicole, please could you tell us about your relationship to A&R and the various roles that you've worked in over the years?
Yeah, sure. So I started off working for Soul Jazz Records in London. They've got a record shop, and originally I was working in another record shop and I was hanging out in their record shop a lot, Sounds Universe, and eventually got hired, and over the course of 12 years I put out lots of dance artists, Vortet, Mala, Scream, Hieroglyphic Being, lots of different in and around dance music, and then eventually I left after a long time and started my own record label called Mike, and yeah, I just release independent underground artists, I suppose.
Okay, and you do the talent scouting for your label?
Yeah, so it's I suppose it's quite an organic process, you know, talking to friends and going to gigs, scouring the internet, kind of like record shopping, I suppose, in the way that you kind of dig deep and yeah, just trying to find the best thing that kind of fits with my overall brand, which I kind of look at it like a sort of DJ set really as well. Like if I was going to play something, if I was going to play a 5-hour set, how would I start and how would I finish? And that's kind of how I approach the people that that fit the brand. So it's kind of quite a broad scope.
That's a really nice approach to curation, actually. I never thought about thinking about it like that. It's really cool. So Holly, please would you tell us how you came to be an A&R scout at Warner?
A bit of a weird route, and I feel like the more people I talk to that do this job, I feel like everyone has a bit of a kind of weird route into it. So actually before this job at Warner, I was working in sync, so doing music for TV and film and advertising, and I was working at this tiny little publishing company, and while I was there I was passionate about writing, and so I started writing for a couple of blogs, for Line of Best Fit and then a little blog called The Most Radicalist. And for The Most Radicalist, we could only review stuff that had been like online for like 24 hours. That was the longest amount of time that we could have. So, and I'd write like 4 articles for them a day. So I just had this kind of cycle of new music that I was on or looking at. And so the A&R team at this little publisher was 2 people. And so I said, oh, you know, please can I come to A&R meetings? I've got loads of stuff I could play. I just kind of wanted the experience of it. And then I just got really lucky in that the 2 guys there who were in the A&R team were really encouraging of me, and someone recommended me to someone who recommended me to Phil, who runs the label that I work for now, who looked me up on Twitter. I think probably saw that I'd been reviewing lots of music, like, and that I'd been posting on my Twitter, which I kind of used as like my sort of online CV. And invited me down for a coffee, and I got my job there. Started a few months later.
Okay, amazing. And who have you worked with in terms of artists that we may know?
So the label as a whole works with some amazing artists like Foles, who won a Brit last night, and Dua Lipa, and Mist, and Parsley, and loads of others. The acts that I personally work with are kind of probably on like a smaller, more baby level. I'm only 2 years into my job there, but I work with an incredible 2-piece pop band from Glasgow called Heights, and I've also signed a dance act called Sleepwalkers, who hopefully both of which you'll hear a bit more from this year.
Okay, exciting. Would you be able to give us a bit of insight into like what a usual week at work is like for you? Like what do you get up to?
It's a really good question. No 2 weeks are the same, I'll put it that way. It's a real mix. So a big part of my job is talent scouting. My job is to sort of be like across all the best new music coming from all over the UK. And so you kind of develop this like really broad network of people and things that are gonna like kind of give that talent to you. So that might be like managers that we know and we really trust that manage other artists. That might be trusted contacts across publishing. It might be lawyers are a really big part who will kind of tip you off on new artists. But then there's like the internet as well. So maybe that like, for me that used to be loads of blogs that I went to. Now it's probably lots of like tastemakers, curation, whether that's BBC Introducing, or data platforms as well. It's something I'm personally really interested in, and kind of using them like you would a kind of trusted friend. But we sign artists that have had multiple albums out. We sign artists that have never put a single piece of music out. And we sign singles, we sign EPs, we sign albums, we do everything. So it's really broad.
What would those data platforms be?
So Warner, a couple of years ago after I started, went through a process of trialling loads of different platforms and actually ended up acquiring one called Sodatone. And that basically is a platform that kind of scrapes data from Spotify and Instagram and various social media platforms, and kind of uses their own sort of like algorithmic tool to just chuck up interesting artists or tracks, maybe that they've come off TikTok, like the sort of Lil Nas X, or maybe it's just an artist that's put their debut track out and it's got loads of organic engagement with it. And I kind of use that like you would a kind of trusted friend in publishing to tip you off on things.
Okay, so these sites can measure like what's getting played on TikTok in the background and stuff like that? Sort
of, yeah. They're kind of up to you how you kind of personally as a user choose to take them, but they're like a definitely important part of what we do. And it's interesting rather than anything else just to see kind of how artists are interacting with things. So talent scouting, that's a big part. And then with the artists that we do sign to the label, it's sort of, my job is to get the best music out of them possible. All of the records that actually hit Spotify and Apple Music are my responsibility. So my job for them is tailored on their needs. So some of my bands and artists want to be in 5 sessions a week. So my job is to hustle them into the best rooms and find the perfect collaborators or remixers, or producers, and then some of the artists, you know, just really need to be left alone to their creative process. So my job is to kind of inspire and give feedback and help run the edges. And it's really depends on the artist, that bit of the job. But that's the bit of the job that I love more than anything.
Wicked. Thanks, Holly. So Tony is here too. CDR is like an established platform for hosting interviews and discussions, but you also create space for producers to give their work a kind of road tests on a big sound system in the venues that you host in. Where did this idea come from, and how has it helped you to connect with brand new talent to potentially scout?
Well, essentially the idea came from a knee-jerk reaction to some of my experiences in the music industry. I was signed to a big label for a long time, and then when we got dropped, you know, I kind of had to make the decision that either I become a paint and decorator, don't know anything about paint and decorating, but it's something I could have learnt, or kind of think about what to do post being dropped. But I also, more importantly, made a decision that I wanted to continue working in the music industry, but I wanted to do something that was a bit more about just making records as an artist or a producer. So at that time I was DJing quite a lot, from being a live band. I was kind of DJing more, and I'd always include my own music in the DJ set. And you know, every 3 or 4 I kind of put a cheeky CD on one of my tracks or beats in, and then the floor didn't clear, right? So not that's a bad thing sometimes, you know it is. So I was like, actually, this is quite interesting. What would be really interesting to actually have a night that's actually just about the idea, rather than the white labels or the dubs, just something about music in development. So I literally called a friend of mine who was a really good music fan at the time, booked a venue called the Embassy, which was a small space downstairs in Islington at the time, maybe 70 cap. Made a few flyers, dropped them off in a record shop, called the night CDR and said to people, I'm working on this night, it's all about new music, bring your then CDs down. What we also did as well, we had a bunch of blank CDs that we got, and we basically used those as flyers and put them into record shops. So then the night was essentially a night of all this new music. And I'll never forget the first night for 2 reasons. One, because I distinctly remember preparing deciding which track to bring down, and the fact that literally an hour before I'd literally burnt it onto a CD, and then that was my contribution. But then equally, as the night was developing in the early part of the night, I was getting like these stacks of CDs coming through, and then that DJ set was the most powerful thing ever, because I had no idea what that music was. No idea, right? So to anyone who DJs, knowing your music is the thing. So it was the complete opposite of that, right? But because I knew a lot of people in the room, and it's all friends, serendipity, I knew the quality would be there. So it, something that would usually be quite risky was actually really, really, really exciting. And that for me was like the beginning of CDR as a concept. And it kind of grew from there. So we're at the Embassy for a while, and then we went to a club called Bridge and Tunnel, which was at the beginning of the whole kind of Shoreditch thing. And then when that closed, we then moved to Plastic People, and were there until basically Plastic People closed. So in that time, we've always done this part of the night, which is called Open CDR, which is a DJ set of new music. But we've obviously branched into other things like doing interviews and other kind of projects related to that. But CDR's always been about new music, and then creating a safe place for new music to exist and see what happens from there. So from doing CDR, I kind of obviously got to know a lot of the artists, particularly a lot of people's production style. And because essentially for most producers, a lot of the time making music is a kind of sacred thing, do you know what I mean? And you don't play it to people until it's finished. So because I'm on this world of development, as in I'm playing your track, it's not finished, you've got to look after it, yeah? You've kind of got this kind of safe relationship with people, do you know what I mean? And the fact that people ask for feedback, and I can give feedback ad hoc, or I can suggest people to work with, or suggest people to collaborate with, I've kind of got this kind of really interesting relationship with artists and producers, because I'm very much part of their development process, in a very ad hoc way. And it's a really beautiful place to be in, because particularly at CDR, at least at the events, it's not about industry, it's not about trying to, it's not about, reach. It's actually about the development of your identity as an artist or a producer, and then some.
Would you be able to give us an idea of artists that have really resonated with you over the years?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that to me has always been something I'm not really interested in talking about, purely and simply because to me, it doesn't matter whether you've been making music for 5 minutes or for 25 years. At CDR, you're the same people, really. You're all people striving to develop your craft, right? So along the way, it's been people like Subtract or Floating Points, My Jane Coles, Monkeys, Sampha, a whole bunch. There's loads of other people who you wouldn't know, who make just as good music, but they've chosen to keep their day job, or they've chosen to look after their kids. Do you know what I mean? To me, CDR is very much about a safe place to develop your craft as a human being.
That's really special. So you're watching Behind the Scenes Live from Doors Open. I'm Martha. If you've just joined us, then welcome. We are learning all about A&R today. So drop your questions for our experts in the comments, and I'll get you some answers later on. Let's turn our attention to look at the scope of A&R and exactly what the job can include. So first, if you don't mind, can we look at what the letters actually stand for? Because I've heard two different things. There's kind of artist relations and then artists and repertoire. So Holly, what's the difference between those two?
I think probably everyone's got a slightly different understanding of this. So my personal understanding is artist and repertoire is a sort of slightly old school term, but is what I understand by A&R, which is basically sort of find the artist and also find the repertoire. And that maybe comes from times when the repertoire and the artist weren't necessarily coming from the same place. And for me, artist relations is more to do with the sort of direct relationship between artist and label. For me, my job kind of encompasses both. My job is the front line between the artist and the label, and all of the communications and everything starts and ends with me, and I'm the one that's ultimately responsible for all of my artists' music and responsible for managing their relationships with the teams at the rest of the label. And so whilst artist and repertoire is definitely what I understand by A&R, the job is both at the same time.
It's kind of evolved out of that.
Yeah, completely. What do you think?
I echo what Holly said, but I'd add to that for me, with artist relations, it almost has like a commercial connotation. Because outside of music industry, there are companies who have an artist relations department, and that's more about how talent and opportunities can work together. So for example, in a music tech company, for example, you'll have, say, people who have got artists and producers on their roster who use the products, but then you try to find interesting opportunities for those artists and producers to use the kit or collaborate with other brands or whatever. So to me, it's definitely artist relations is more a kind of commercial front end, you know, tinged title.
Right.
I mean, I'd say I'd agree. The jobs I've seen out there for artist relations, it's more kind of for artists and like distributors, you know, music distributors that will, I suppose, act as sort of, it's a similar to A&R, but you're not necessarily getting involved in the creative part of it. It's more kind of looking at marketing strategies and, you know, analytics and such, you know, like knowing, you know, what's possible out there, I suppose, with the type of music. It's similar, but not, I wouldn't say it's the same as directly working on the music itself.
Okay.
As you would with A&R.
Yeah. And so, Holly, when you say repertoire, that includes the written music?
Yeah, that's basically songs. So I guess that kind of maybe harks back to a time, I don't know, this is actually just what I've always understood by it, which is not necessarily true, of times when you may have a, you know, phenomenal artist but who isn't that involved in the kind of writing of their own songs. So this is why, like, I work for A&R at a label, but our relationships with publishers who look after songwriters and lots of songwriters who aren't necessarily artists themselves are really important, because sometimes the songs for our artists may not actually come out of writing sessions that they've been in themselves. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So that's sort of what I understand by the repertoire side.
So maybe, Holly, you could tell us a bit about the process of signing an artist in a major label environment from when you've discovered them to the release date of the first song.
It's really intense. It's really brilliant, and occasionally a bit traumatic as well. That's how it feels. The like actual process of it, I mean, it totally depends on the artist. Like sometimes you just hear a track and you're like, we've got to sign this, this is amazing, and you'll get the lawyers to put the offer out that afternoon and it all works. And sometimes it's a really elongated process. My experience with Heights, so with this Glaswegian pop band who I was talking about, was I came across a video from like a trusted contact that they put out already, played it in our A&R meeting, which is a weekly sort of hand in your homework time where you will sit around and discuss the new artists that are out there. Played to my bosses who felt as passionately about it as I did, and then it was sort of, you know, then it's a big process of negotiations with lawyers over a few weeks, and you spend loads of time with the artists and making sure that you're the right fit for them and they're the right fit for you. And so that's just about really kind of getting into it and spending a lot of time with their management and, you know, dealing out the strategy and introducing them to our marketing teams and digital teams and everything else. And then if it all feels right and you can make the deal work, then you sign them. And then you're sort of, you know, day one is like go time, you know, you're putting a strategy in place, you're figuring out what music you have, what records you don't have, and that's the best bit of it, and it's messy and glorious.
So that would be the case like with Heights, they've got their own repertoire.
Yeah.
What
so
would you need to do if that wasn't the case?
Then it might be that you're sort of, you know, going out to publishers or songwriters and seeing what songs are available out there to cut, and finding those for your artist as well.
Okay.
I think, you know, more often than not these days, artists are involved in the writing of their own records to an extent, but it might be that there's an existing record that you hear that you're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing, and then you take it to your artist and they do X, Y, and Z to it, and it sort of morphs into this other thing.
Okay. So you'd need an ear for matching things up.
Yeah, and there are some amazing kind of songs people out there, and amazing A&Rs who have great ears for songs and records. And so yeah, but it's really totally dependent on the artist and what they need. You know, some artists you sign and the track's already out there, it already is, you know, formally released, and all you need to do is sort of supercharge it on the marketing side or something. So it's hugely variable.
Nicole, how would this process work with you as an independent label? What would the kind of main differences be?
I suppose there's not huge amounts of difference. You know, the way I find artists is quite similar to how Holly does. You know, I suppose I'm coming from a record shop, record diggers background, so I'm kind of always listening for people putting out self-released small things and then maybe approaching them, or they're part of a bigger band and I'm just interested to see whether they've got anything, you know, that they wouldn't want to show any other, you know, something a bit different to what they're doing at the moment. They want to show a different side to themselves. I suppose probably it might be down to the fact the main difference is probably the economic side of it, in terms of I'm not necessarily going to fly you to LA for a week in the studio, maybe Bognor Regis or something like that.
If you're lucky.
But, you know, if you're lucky, thank you, Martha. With a little disclaimer out there. Yeah, I mean, it's a similar process, I suppose. But I suppose I'm working with artists that are perhaps a little bit more ready-made in terms of the fit for my label. And it's a bit more experimental, like I'm happy for it to be kind of like an experiment what they're doing. And generally it's more about me giving encouragement and like showing a pool, you know, like loads of tracks and have it, you know, just building that relationship and making sure that, you know, we're on the same page. They're not thinking about, you know, having kids or something when I'm not thinking about having kids or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Like we're on, or they want, you know, they want to play at Pasha, which I've had with artists in the past, where it's like, cool, you can play at Pasha, that's great, but you're doing kind of different music to what is gonna get you there, you know. So I think it's maybe just like, you know, trying to bring it all together. But yeah.
For sure. So let's spend a bit more time looking at artist discovery and how you find things. You guys have touched on it already, but how important are platforms like radio and magazines and online sites? How important are they, and what kind of role would they play in your week spent looking for talent? Nicole?
Well, I work in a little bit of PR on the side, so I think, I mean, it's a little bit different. I do scale, you know, I do look at the larger online magazines and everything like that, but I think it's slightly coming from the way those magazines are going. It's more kind of, I suppose, fashion-led, and there's other sort of things involved in that, and I think generally the artists on there are maybe being picked up by a lot of major labels, so it's not necessarily something I'm looking at as, you know, to get my to get something that I feel that's going to fit the label. But it's just, like I said, it's just looking at everything, and you know, it's important to know where the music that I'm releasing is going to fit on these blogs, and because, you know, we obviously want exposure. So yeah, it's always good to know where the music fits within the scope of everything.
Holly?
Yeah, I'd say it's a massively important part of the kind of scouting process for us. You know, BUC Introducing are like an amazing organisation, and sometimes they'll be championing artists before they've even had any releases out. And I can think of a few artists I love who've come through those kind of channels. Similarly with blogs, I used to have like a tabs page with like trusted places where I'd go for new music, and it would be like 50 different kind of blogs and random SoundClouds, and maybe that's slightly less relevant now because often some of the artists that we're looking at are yet to release any music. But then again, like, yeah, sometimes it's amazing when artists have released music because you get to sort of see how they want to present themselves, you know, with very little kind of interference or judgment from anyone else, and that's really awesome to see, and you only really get that through sort of looking at, you know, blogs or radio interviews or things like that, and you get a real kind of sense of the artist before you've sort of done any meetings or met them, and that's a really exciting process.
Interesting that you mentioned like not using SoundCloud so much anymore. Like I obviously have to find like, a lot of new music, not for the same reason as you guys, like I just try to play it.
Yeah.
But I used to be on SoundCloud constantly, and I'm finding it like maybe less easy to use these days.
Definitely finding it kind of less easy to use, and I feel like, you know, for us the sort of era of blogs as kind of tastemakers is slightly, you know, that field has got way more noisy. I feel like I'm definitely mixing my metaphors there, but there's more kind of players, so maybe you're kind of actually looking at feeder Spotify playlists where it's throwing up stuff algorithmically, or you're looking at radio programs and not just the sort of like, you know, main radio stations, but smaller ones as well that are kind of cool and tastemakery in that space. And Instagram, I spend an extraordinary amount of my time looking for new artists on Instagram, which is weird and brilliant in itself, and Twitter as well. You know, I can think of a few tracks this year that have been signed off a Twitter video that's sort of gone viral and people have started interacting with it. You know, we kind of live in an age where it's so easy to put out music and to sort of spark a fire in via kind of social media, that sometimes it's really important for us to see before we sign them how artists are interacting with that audience and what levels they're comfortable with and not comfortable with.
Yeah, for sure. Tony, what are your methods for cutting through the noise and finding new stuff that you really like?
There's no cutting through noise because I'm at CDR, because it's the opposite to conventional A&R. I run an event that people bring tracks down and the quality is great. So it's a really interesting you should ask that, because for a long, long time it was almost like what happened in the outside world didn't matter, you know, because for me it was all about, you know, I can tell you the first Sam Shepard demo that I've ever heard, or I can tell you the first Maya Jen Cole's demo. Do you know what I mean? For me, it was almost like having a safe place for artists to develop, and you see them develop over time. And then some people go on to do really, really well, and then some people don't go on to do different things. Do you know what I mean? So for me, it was almost like an A&R shell in its own right, and my role wasn't actually to pick and choose. My role was to create a platform. The challenge comes, particularly when you're trying to develop something like CDR, is how do you maintain a platform that's about everybody and everyone having access, but then obviously some people are going on to be successful and then the spotlight is on them, and then it starts to change the dynamic of the event. Do you know what I mean? So to me it's been a really interesting process, you know, kind of like nurturing talent in a particular space. And those people who go on to be successful, having my relationship change with them in terms of it could be them asking for advice based on my experiences in the music industry, or it could be about tapping into networks that, you know, we may, you know, relationships we have with other music services. But for me, it's always about just kind of this balancing act between creating a safe space for artists to develop and take those risks and find their kind of inner producer or inner artist in a safe environment. And then when it matters, to start thinking about how to relate that to audience, so to speak. Some people are really proactive and really good at that, can do it themselves, particularly people who've grown up with the internet, so to speak. But equally, a lot of people that I really believe the internet, this climate has changed where people are just geniuses and they need resources to help them shape their genius. You know, I think the challenge with the music industry in this day and age is that it's much more about how you look than the music, you know, to a large extent. And I think for me, I really want to create opportunities where people, producers, artists can just develop their craft without, you know, take those risks in a really safe environment without restrictions. You know, that's not to say that I'm not interested in everything. I'm definitely interested in music innovation. I'm definitely interested in music that is soulful, has its roots in black music and takes on a kind of technical electronic perspective, of course. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about helping artists be the best creators that they can be.
What would you guys' advice be to people watching at home who are artists? How can they get your attention? Holly?
Oh my goodness. Just keep doing what they're doing and focus on doing that as brilliantly as possible. You know, artists are artists, and we sign artists because we love their vision. You know, part of the reason kind of why you sign them is to sort of hope that you can take away some of the sort of bits of what they're doing that maybe they're less good at, whether that's giving them support in digital strategy, creative ideas, or whatever that is, so that they can focus on what they're doing brilliantly, which is making music or singing or performing. And so I would just say focus entirely on making that and the records that they're making, on the songwriting that they're doing, as brilliant as possible. and I love that spaces like the one that Tony's created existed. Like, that is exactly the kind of space that, you know, that is so important that artists have that freedom to be able to experiment, because artists that are coming into a sort of, you know, label system, you know, the immense freedom that spaces like this create, you know, there's less of that as you kind of get further and further on in your career, as I'm sure you know. So take advantage of all of these incredible opportunities and make what you've got brilliant, and it will, and then everyone will come to you.
Yeah.
Nicole, do you agree?
I do agree, yeah. I kind of miss forums in that way that people, I would just say that for artists to carry on sharing, you know, the more that they share, the more, you know, the likelihood that someone's going to see it and or hear it. And I suppose Tony's CDR model is kind of like a live forum, and you know, I just keep trying to find these little things in your town, you know, and create your, you know, just create your scene with your people. You know.
Would you add anything other than get down to a CDR event?
Get down to a CDR. Find your people as well. You know,
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I spent a bit of time up at some of the music schools recently this year, like Lippo and Leeds College of Music, and the amount of talent coming out of those places is amazing. And I feel like part of the reason why they're so powerful is because you've kind of got this community of people together. So whether that's for you at college or if it's, you know, through a network like this, you know, that's so important, especially for young artists who need to build their confidence up, who need space to create and experiment and space to get things wrong. So yeah, love that.
Wicked. Big question, but what would each of you say makes a good A&R?
I'd say relationship. You know, just really, there's different kinds of A&R, right? But I think being mindful of the stakeholders, you know, whether it's the label or management or whoever, brand, and really kind of like having the artist back and helping them be the best artists they can be. That's what I believe it is.
Okay. Nicole?
Honesty, I think, is always the best policy. You know, yeah, just being honest, like Tony said, you know, being really supportive. I see it sort of like a little mama relationship, you know, and you know, like the product is the, you know, the music is the artist's child, and you're kind of taking everybody under your wing and just trying to, but stay true to what they're about, but also looking at the wider picture and how they fit within the brand.
Yeah, I love all of that. I think the only thing I'd add is a sort of like very deep and very true love of music. Like, I feel like the reason I do my job is because when I was 14, the only thing that made me understand the world around me was having my headphones on and listening to music. And that music is still the same stuff that I go back to now. And I'm still happiest sat on the tube with my inner headphones on, blocking the rest of the world out. And I love the idea that in my job, I might enable in like a very small sense, like artists to make that music who is going to do that for other people. And so for me, I love this job because I get to feel really in touch with like that purpose.
Do you have any A&Rs that you look up to, like throughout history, people that have been kind of inspirations to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. My boss, Joe Kentish, is a phenomenal A&R. He signed Dua Lipa, and learning from him and the way that he thinks about records forensically is extraordinary. That and Bryony Turner, who is just now being promoted to president of Atlantic Records in the UK. And she's just like a badass female A&R, and her ears are extraordinary. And when I started, I think she was the only other female A&R working in the Warner building. And she's amazing at her job. And so she's just someone who I personally really look up to.
And has that changed in the Warner building? Are there more ladies in A&R now?
A few, yeah. We're still the minority, but we move, and we're getting there.
Okay. Tony, any A&Rs that you look up to?
Yeah, definitely. So there's recent ones are people like Tick, Young Turks. I think he's amazing. I particularly have a really good relationship with him because he has been connected to CDR from day one. So he brought some of his artists to CDR. He's also found some artists at CDR, which has been fantastic. Alex Botain is doing some really interesting stuff. But I have to give a heads up to people like Julian Palmer from way back when. He was A&R at 4th and Broadway, which was an indie label run by Ireland back in the day. There's Darkest Beast. He was a phenomenal A&R, signed to Amy Winehouse, Hinder Hicks, Charlotte, a bunch of people you will know nothing about, but they're fantastic British female artists. And also this guy, Lincoln Elias, who was at Sony in the early 90s, signed people like Sade, Jamiroquai. And what was really good about doing this panel was it kind of took me back to some of my early days of being in the music industry, when I was a programmer working for studios, and seeing people like Lincoln or Darkus and seeing how they operated in the old music industry, you know, and how, you know, they could be really savvy with the resources that they had and used a big building like Sony to bring through some really, really interesting artists and really nurture them. So I think I'd question whether that still happens nowadays because the industry's changed so much, but I think that those kind of A&R people who are really guttural about their vision for an artist and have this big building to really exploit, I think that I've got a lot of respect for those people.
Interesting. A few interesting points which we'll return to. But Nicole?
I'd say, well, a big one for me is Berry Gordy from Motown, just because I loved the music. I loved his whole attitude and the way he, you know, put people together, and just, you know, I think A&R is about getting the best out of people, and he certainly has, you know, a good, you know, taking Stevie Wonder from a 12-year-old child to Stevie Wonder, you know. But, you know, more London-based people, I'd say, or UK-based, I'd say Alex Nutt from Eglo. He's done, you know, he probably doesn't get the props that he deserves, but he's taken people like Floating Points and Fatima, and just, well, like I said, I've seen, working in a record shop, I've seen I've heard people's early music and how they've started out, and the way that he's kind of nurtured these artists and made them kind of like, or helped them to be global stars. I think he's done it in a very decent way. There's loads of people. Ross Allen, who's obviously kind of like a UK A&R legend, I suppose. You know, he worked at Island Records, and he's just someone who's just super passionate about music, and I've always got a lot of respect for him as well.
Okay, these are all people to Google if you want to know more about boss A&Rs. Tony, going back to what you were just saying about the old music industry, I'd be really curious to hear how everyone thinks the process of A&R has changed and had to adapt to the new music industry.
To be really cynical, I just think, to be really cynical, I'm probably going to get loads of slick for this. I just think the industry in big buildings is more about profile and about this relationship between the music you make and your reach. There's obviously lots of examples that isn't the case, but I just think, for me, looking from the outside in and looking at the kind of music that trends and the kind of music that does well, there's a big disconnect between true artistry and what's happening on the underground and what's happening in the world, related, and a disconnect between that and actually looking at artists who are really savvy with, you know, with their socials. That's not to say that there are artists who are genuinely amazing and have genuine reach. I really get that, but I just question this. I just question it, you know. It's not that it was perfect back in the day. You know, the industry had its own problems when I was, you know, new to the industry, but I could see, particularly when there's, you know, big, you know, the role of big buildings, the role of big multinationals was to have this big building that has cash cows, and they sell, you know, your Whitney Houstons or whatever. They are the global reach, and you'll have that small office that's basically an indie label that can take risks, do you know what I mean, and experiment. I don't see that happening so much anymore. Maybe the internet has replaced that, but I think that there's a real disconnect between the true music innovation in big buildings and in A&R per se. That's what I believe. That's what I think.
Holly, what do you think about that? And how do you make sure that just because an artist has like a bit of a buzz around them, that it's going to be something that's like the right fit for your label?
It's a really good question. I feel like just to sort of take the second part of that first, you kind of just got to trust yourself, which is the hardest thing in the world, especially when, you know, there's a hot new band and, you know, the whole industry's gone nuts and Sony have offered this much and such is flying them out to here, but there's no music release and there's no way to kind of temperature check whether it's good, but like everyone's piling down to the C by Arms on a Tuesday and they're ahead of things and everyone's gone like completely bonkers for something, trying to kind of cut through that. I guess, you know, it's just trusting your instincts, which is probably the hardest thing to do, and knowing that you will get stuff wrong and get stuff right. Just returning to what you said, because I think it's a really interesting point and probably not one that I can speak to. I've done this job for 2 years. You know, I don't know what it's like. You know, one of the things I would say from my experience is that definitely, you know, we have to look at data. We have to look back at the stuff that's kind of talking back to us. We have to look at the way that artists interact with their audiences. But Heights, this Glaswegian pop band, you know, I saw one video of theirs that had like maybe 1,000 views or less. They had like, I know friends of mine that have got more Instagram followers than they had at that time. They had like, you know, 3 posts, nothing. But I just heard a track that I fell in love with and met them and just saw tons of personality and tons of opportunity. And my boss, Joe, signed this incredible 17-year-old songwriter called Griff, who had nothing out at all anywhere, just off the strength of some like unbelievable records. And I'd say the start she's had last year in putting out her music is pretty like unparalleled. So I can't speak to what it was like before, but I think there are people still making brave decisions based off what that thing inside you tells you, that, you know, you love it and you think other people would love it, and having a vision for it as well.
Nicole, how have you managed to preserve and protect your instincts in the music industry across your career?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing, you know, there's nothing you can replace in terms of your ear and what, you know, and having belief in something. I think there's lots of times, I've seen it loads where there's been hype around something, and generally hype, there is something there, but where it can go wrong is other people getting involved. If you kind of keep it with the artist and the music. So I've kind of forgotten the question, but but yeah, I think, you know, just concentrating on yourself, you know, using your ears. Is it good or not? You know, let's go with that, and you start there. Really.
Yeah. Then everything else comes after. Okay, so to become an A&R in all the various forms that you guys work in, would I need to go to uni? Would I need to be classically trained in music? Or what kind of skills would I need to work in A&R? Tony?
I think you're best.
Okay.
Speak from your
I don't know. I really don't know. And I'd say there's absolutely no sort of checklist of things that you need at all. You know, you definitely do not have to go to uni. You definitely do not need X, Y, or Z. All you need, I would say, I mean, and this is just sort of like speaking from chatting to the people that I work with, you know, there are some amazing A&Rs out there who are, you know, classically trained or can talk about music in real depth, and that's a real asset to them. And there are some that, you know, can't at all, but just like are absolutely incredible at spotting hits or hit songs or whatever. So there's no special sauce, just I'd say a fair amount of hustle, because getting into this job it's still one of the areas of the industry that is like remarkably closed off to new talent, and requires you to really hustle yourself in some doors. You know, there's no sort of training program you can apply to. There's very little spaces where you can send a CV to that will give, you know, anyone will come back to you. So I'd say it's a sort of a job that you've got to start doing before anyone's asking you to do it. And I think in a weird way, that's kind of what I did, even though I had no idea what it was. You know, I was just blogging about new music because I really liked it, and they paid me £5 an article. You know, and I just got really lucky. And so I think you've just got to start doing it, find your platform where people are going to find out the things that you're on. But, you know, if I find that there's a little SoundCloud page or Instagram page where someone's just posting the hottest new music, you know, weeks before I've ever heard of it or someone else's, I want to know who that person is, and I probably want to get them in and ask them who they're listening to. So start doing it before anyone's asked, and don't worry about anything else.
Okay. Tony, how important would you say it is to start your own platform?
I'd say it's definitely exciting. No, on that tip, I think it's just important to, you know, create. There's value in creating your own culture and creating your own community. Whether you're creating an event like CDR, or you're setting up a club night that's promoting music from your mates create. I think there's something about just creating an offline space, you know, and grow it, you know, and just be amongst people who share your vision. Not necessarily share your methods per se, but definitely you're kind of singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of what the music is coming through, the music that you believe in. Because if you look throughout history, that's where some of the best genres and best scenes and best labels have come from, that just people being really passionate about a particular perspective or take on music and pushing it through. And then at some point, industry and popularity collide.
Nicole, anything to add?
No, I'd just say you need stamina. Yeah, you need to have a proper deep love of music. Yeah, those are the two main things, and not to be like so followed by trends. You need to kind of have your own mind. Yeah,
for sure. We will go to your questions from the live stream about A&R very soon, but before we do, I have one more question for Holly, Tony and Nicole. Please would you each share with us your number one tip for working with and nurturing artists? Tony?
Be open and patient. That was two. I know.
But very precise, I loved it. Open and patient. Holly?
I'd say like really listening.
Really listening?
Yeah.
Okay. And Nicole?
gosh. Yeah, I mean, it's the same as Tony's, but I'd probably say patience. You know, you got to be patient in this game. It's not about rushing anyone. Yeah, you won't get the best.
Essential. Okay, let's hear what all of you guys are saying. So we have a question from Evan on Instagram. How will the future of A&R change with new ways of signing artists? Would anyone like to answer that first?
Nope.
But you're the best position. In response to that, I think relationships, you know, I think that in terms of my connection to artists and how I support artists and how I A&R artists, it's actually about relationships and how for each artist or each group it's different. So I think that as platforms evolve, I think the role that of A&R, artists and repertoire and supporting, it evolves, you know, but I think there are some core skills that are needed, ones that we talked about, listening, being open and having patience, regardless of what the platform is, because at the end of the day, the role of the A&R is about this, you know, supporting the artistic, creative vision of an artist.
For sure. Anyone want to jump in on that, or should we take it on?
Wholeheartedly agree.
Okay. A firm agreement. Nicole?
I do think that the platforms like Bandcamp that are really good, I think it's important for artists to get their hands dirty and trying to know a little bit more about how it all works and to do your own little dry test run. So any platforms that might miss that out, I'm not necessarily for at the minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take another question. Holly, this is possibly one for you. It's from Andrea on Instagram. Can the artist choose their A&R, or is it something defined by their record label?
The artists definitely choose their A&R, especially when they're signed. Like, you know, you'll have that person reach out, and at least that, in my experience, that's how it is. Definitely, that relationship is like, you know, I wouldn't want anyone else working with the artist that you signed, and I think it's really important that there's sort of an element of personal responsibility, because to Tony's point, you know, it's all about that relationship and about finding people that you can trust. You know, my artists, some of them come around my house for dinner and like we'll be voice noting ideas for choruses and things like this. You know, it's a really close personal relationship that sits like right at the heart of what we do. And so I'd say finding your A&R and knowing your A&R and getting along with your A&R, even if that person might change due to whatever circumstances, like like a really important part of your choice as an artist.
Okay. Renata asks, how can I start practicing my A&R skills so I'm more prepared for future work opportunities?
Curation, right?
Yeah.
Curation.
Go out and find them. You know, set yourself a task, whether it's like finding one new artist every day or finding 10 a week or however many it is, and find a way of sort of showing, you know, putting that out there, even if it's just yourself, of like why you found them interesting and what you found interesting about them.
Or things like, okay, pick a city, find what new music is happening in that city. So look at it from a cultural perspective rather than from an artistic perspective. You never know where the next big scene or mixed genre is going to come from, so look at it from that perspective.
Do a mix and put it out there.
Oh yeah.
I love that.
Get on to it. Melissa asks, this is perhaps one for you, Nicole, are we facing a shortage in new independent labels that make a real impact in music, and how does that impact the industry as a whole?
I don't feel, I feel because I feel like I'm immersed in it. I know lots of other talented independents, so I don't feel like we're losing that. But there's lots of other economic reasons why it might, that label might not carry on for as long as they hopefully they should do, even though there's some really cool people behind it. But no, I think it's out there. You just have to dig or go to a record shop, ask, if you got one.
And Holly, do you ever work with smaller labels if you found something that you like that they've already released?
I haven't, not yet. I think it's something that, like, as a company we do, but I'm not sure I'm experienced in to really kind of talk about that in any depth, actually.
The role of the label has really changed, and I think the more you have a generation of artists who don't even understand what a label is, as in, I make music on my phone, I put it to SoundCloud, what do I need you for? Do you know what I mean? So I think in some respects, yes, the labels is not as strong or as prominent as it used to be, but there'll still need to be an environment, an ecosystem that basically helps an artist with the more formal side of industry. So maybe it's about how labels evolve as an entity, which I think is actually really exciting.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Definitely. It's like, for example, for us, like our international team is like the one that's so important, like more important than ever, that our developing artists are sort of like broken internationally from day one, and all of them know about them. So I think that's so important that, the barriers to entry are much lower in a way. You can have a track and you can put it up and it can kind of blow very quickly without anyone really being that involved in it. But getting from that to something really meaningful, whatever that success looks like for you, whether that's having a top 10 charting hit, whether it's selling out, this venue here, or, being the hottest new name from your town. Yeah. Getting to that's where I think labels are still going to retain their value. Yeah. I hope.
Independent labels are still like about community as well, That is like, your trial run. So,
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there is still a use for labels, basically.
Yeah. just about.
Gerardo would like to know a bit more about the A&R's responsibility after an album is released in terms of when it comes to promotion and advertising. How long will an artist get support after their album is out there?
I don't know if there's a kind of like a specific time, but there'll be we have in-house promotions team and PR teams and radio teams, and if those teams already pre-exist them signing to the label, then we'll work with independent teams on that as well, and it's a huge part of what we do. And there's but we work that music for as long as it's a cycle or until there's new music. So it's definitely not sort of chuck it all out there and then it's out, cool, we'll take a bit of a backseat. It's like signing a record deal, like you do all the work before and then it comes out and then like the real work starts.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take one more question, which comes from Tom. From an artist's perspective, how do I deal with an A&R that wants to change my art and undermine it so that they can sell more?
Ooh.
History.
Yeah.
History's riddled with that.
Yeah.
So what can we do about it?
Sign to the right label and sign to the right A&R.
Yeah.
And really, I just advise this so strongly to every young artist who's considering any deal with any label, is just really take your time over that decision. You know, don't rush it. Whoever you are, however much money is on the table, you know, the real people, the people that you want to sign with, are the people that will still be there if you say I need, you know, however long to think about it. The people that you want to work with will still be there afterwards. So try and not be in that position.
And to think about it as an equal partnership. You know, it's not, you're not, no one is above you, you're not, you know, it's an equal thing. So you have much of a voice in that, and how, you know, especially how you want to shape yourself as someone else. So.
And also it depends what it is, right? Because there are some situations where, you know, hooking up with that right producer or that writer can take your art to places that you may not have seen, or you know, or you may not have seen, right? So I think there's definitely some. It's about relationships again. So maybe it's about. So to answer the question, maybe it's about actually being open initially to suggestions, and then working through it, and then making a personal decision about it. There are merits to an A&R. Part of the A&R role is to basically help shape creative vision, whether that's working with a great producer or songwriter or musicians or whatever, or stylist, you know. But at the end of the day, as an artist, you have control and you can say no.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone who submitted a question, and thank you for watching. Massive thanks to our panel, Tony, Holly and Nicole. And there's tons more videos on doorsopen.co/blog if you want to learn more about working in the music industry. Thanks again for watching. Catch you next time.